ASEAN a potential to be a global player. So this time, Yerim will talk about the crisis of democracy in Myanmar, limitation of ASEAN, and influence of South Korea. So if Yerim is ready, we can meet Yerim for the first presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Bay. But however, my video technology problem didn't run well, so I have to just speak.
Yes, no problem, Yerim.
I will share my screen. Wait a second, please. Yes, I hope everyone can see my presentation. And if you can see, wait. And I'll start right now. Good morning, everyone. I'm Yerim Lee from Department of International Relations in Yonsei Graduate School. And the research that I'll present today is the crisis of democracy in Myanmar, a limitation of ASEAN, and the influence of South Korea. Today's presentation will proceed like this: index, introduction, literature review, case study about Myanmar, the limitation of ASEAN, and the fifth one is South Korea's influence on Myanmar, and lastly, the conclusion. My research topic deals with the democracy crisis in Myanmar since 2021 coup d'etat. The reason I chose Myanmar as a case is that South Korea and Southeast Asia have had economic and political friendly relations as comrades since 20 centuries. And also in 2017, President Moon Jae-in also declared a new Southern policy to have more developed relationship with Southeast Asia. So Korea should keep in touch with their issues, so I choose Myanmar. And I also wanted to find out that there's a crisis in our neighboring countries, especially under the military. And furthermore, I've started researching data to find out the complexity of international community, which refers to the limitation of ASEAN community. In addition, when the regional organizations are unable to overcome this crisis and face this dilemma, I wanted to learn about activities that come from the power of the citizens. In some, if there are no political impact from top to the bottom, I wanted to think about the power that comes from citizens. I mean, the other way around, the bottom to the top. So for the literature review, in this part, I searched for the information about democracy in Southeast Asia. And to know the spread of democracy in Southeast Asia, we should know the waves of democracy. So briefly, in the 20th century, democracy was spread through the waves of democracy. And in the third wave, a group of political scientists used to declare that liberal democratic system was the last winner of the regime competition. And when the third wave of democratization has been active in 1980s, it spread to the Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia. However, the democracy has been not long and backslided. And since 2005, an increase in the number of very flawed democratic countries began to appear from the national society. And for more specific information, the Swedish-based intergovernmental organization IDEA, it's an acronym of International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, diagnosed that 70% of the world's population currently lives in a country that is under the control of an undemocratic regime or democratically regressed. And the democratic crisis happened in Southeast Asian countries too. For example, like Thailand was a leader of the implementation of democratization in Southeast Asia from 1980s to mid-2000s. However, two military coups took place and they eventually returned to the authoritarian regime. As another example, the Philippines began to transition the democracy regime in 1986, but however, over the time has returned to the elite democracy, and which shows an incomplete democratic government with elite monopolies. And so we have to briefly learn about the democratic waves in Southeast Asia, and now it's time to know about this case of the Myanmar. And to study more about the democratic crisis in Myanmar, we need to know their history of the democratization. So briefly, first, Myanmar gained independence in 1948 and adopted a parliamentary democracy. So since then, they managed their democratic system for more than a decade. But however, on March 20, 1962, Commander Ne Win staged a military coup and established the Revolutionary Council and took the power. And in March 1980, an incident happened at a coffee shop near the Rangoon Institute of Technology expanded to anti-government protests. Disputes among students must be solved barely by law, but the student who was responsible for this matter was forgiven because his father was a government official. This incident caused the scale of the protest and grew even more as residents joined. Through this, a constitutional amendment was proposed. The president and the party leaders resigned to take responsibilities for this misdeeds. In April 1992, Myanmar's Constitutional Assembly were invited, called the National Assembly, invited representatives of 7 legal registered political parties to hold a coordinating meeting. And the Second National Assembly led to establishment of the Constitution, and this Constitution was promulgated on May 29, 2008 through a referendum. And after that, general election was held on November 7, and the Union Solidarity Development Party, USDP, acronym, a proxy party of the military at the time, won a great victory to form a new parliament in 2011. And so, the Myanmar's democratic crisis started from the general elections of 2020. The ruling party, the NLD, called the National League for Democracy, won a landslide victory from the election of 2020. The military was dissatisfied with this result and staged a coup at dawn on February 1, 2021. The military began to detain the NLD leaders quickly, and military commander Min Aung Hlaing took the power. And the military claimed that NLD's election was a fraudulent election. The Myanmar citizens began the resistance movement when the military declared a martial law and setting back to the past of the military regime. Doctors, nurses, and national officials working in the public hospitals and clinics began to conduct the civil disobedience movements called CDM. And among them, Generation Z, or Z, actively used the social media such as Facebook and Twitter to organize street protests and inform the outside world to show the reality of the Myanmar coup d'etat response and have been combating resistance with violence. So, with 837 civilians were killed and 4,370 arrested or detained by May 29, 2021. And this is how right now the Myanmar cases is. And before we know the limitation of the regional society around Myanmar, quickly about the ASEAN. As we maybe all know, ASEAN is a Southeast Asian international organization founded in Bangkok Declaration at August 8, 1967. The ASEAN is characterized by non-interference in the internal affairs and anonymous decision-making. And this is called a traditional ASEAN way. And they have ASEAN Charter, which is the center of the ASEAN regulation, theoretically opposes the values of military regimes and emphasizes democracy, good governance, and human rights. But as I said from the previous slide, ASEAN Charters theoretically opposes the values of military regimes and emphasizes the democracy and good governance and the human rights. But however, However, ASEAN's traditional characteristic of non-interference in domestic affairs has made it impossible to prevent an ASEAN member state from regressing the democracy. Also, the member states that maintain undemocratic regime opposed to ASEAN's intervention, claiming that this kind of internal interference is the Myanmar's government. In Myanmar's government is opposed to the ASEAN way. And because ASEAN's intervention and decision are only possible if the member states make an anonymous agreement, so the dilemma arises in this regard. And meanwhile, Myanmar's military and ASEAN reached an agreement of 5 ASEAN conditions. The conditions included a halt to violence, reconciliation through constructive dialogue, meditation by ASEAN envoys, and more. However, deadly forces continued to show and no sign of respect for the agreement. The ASEAN limitation to solve the Myanmar coup can be seen, to me, that as a top-down politics failure. So therefore, in consideration that democracy comes from the power of the citizens, I think that it is necessary to have a bottom-up influence from citizens to government. So from the next slide, we will examine how Korea is affecting the Myanmar citizens during the democratic movements against the military. The first theme I concentrated is on the Korean democracy through soft power. The Myanmar citizen paid attention to the fact that Korea became an advanced democracy country after the Gwangju uprising democratization process. As a local pro-democracy activist says, in Myanmar, they were influenced by films that dealt with this era, such as Taxi Driver movie, the 1987 movie. They vowed to win the pro-democracy movement and strengthen the empathy for Korea by hashtag movements recommended watching those movies. And these social networking services were operated by Generation Z. Many scenes of the movies were discussed among the citizens, and including the scene where main characters cannot say anything after seeing the military suppression bullets, and the situation where students protest are overdue to the military. And the movie also profound a very, very profound influence with a song, with the Marching for Our Beloved, which symbolizes the Korea's democratization is related to Myanmar too. It is folk song commemorating the Gwangju May 15, but surprisingly, this song was translated into Burmese, the Myanmar's language, and it was sung by a Myanmar protesters and sung by them. And this image shows that they are playing the Marching for Our Beloved song by a violinist in Myanmar. The next theme I concentrated is solidarity between citizens and the Korean civil society. In Gwangju, more than 100 social organizations has formed called the Myanmar Gwangju Solidarity, and the organization began its activities in March 2021 as a solidarity supporting the Myanmar democratic movement. And as an example of their activities, they launched a 7-day on-site investigation to Thailand and Myanmar border from August 11, 2022, 2022. In specific, Myanmar people had hurt due to the indiscriminate military airstrikes and landmines, but they had not received basic reliefs and supplies and the medical supplies. So in this image, we can see that through the sponsorship of the Jeonnam National University Hospital in South Korea, 30,000 dietary supplements were provided along with the humanitarian aid. And the soft power of the culture, such as movies and songs, and the solidarity among cross-border citizens are contributing to pro-democracy protests in Myanmar. And as a nation that will serve as an example of democratization, I argue that Korea should continue to pay attention to Myanmar and urge more citizens to support their successful democratizations. So in conclusion, I have researched about the democratic crisis in Myanmar. And looking at Myanmar's cases, we can see that ASEAN is facing dilemma in resolving the crisis of democracy. It means that I pointed about the ASEAN's limitations. And after that, I introduced about the impact of Korea on Myanmar citizens and introduced the soft power like Korean film, music, and hashtag movement and solidarity between Myanmar and Korea's civil society. Through the influence of Korea, we could see that it was a great help to Myanmar's democratic movement. And I hope this movement keeps affect the Myanmar and have a good news from there. Thank you. It's done.
네, 감사합니다. Thank you so much, Yerim, for very insightful topic to share this morning. So let us continue with the second presentation. So second presentation has two speakers. So let me just introduce two of them. Hani and Fame, you can also turn on your camera now. So the first one is Hani-chan Roman Ban, who is currently taking up a Master in Arts in Foreign Service at Philippine Women's University. So she obtained a Bachelor in Arts in Foreign Studies from the School of International Relations, formerly a Foreign Service program in New Era University in the Philippines. And she is a licensed professional teacher and a businesswoman at the moment. And then Hani's partner is Fame. Fame Pascua is currently a PhD candidate at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She also obtained a Bachelor of Arts in History and Masters in Philippine Studies from the same university. She teaches history, geography, culture, and she also does research and diplomacy at the School of International Relations, New Era University. So let us welcome Hani and Fame to focus on cultural diplomacy, especially as Asian celebrity diplomacy about BTS. So their title is Be the Solution. So you can see the acronym like BTS. So Hani and Fame, it's your floor.
Thank you so much, Miss Bay. I have to stop my video because I might lose my connection.
Sure.
Thank you. So, 안녕하세요, 여러분. I hope you're having a great time now. Nichan Raman and together with Professor Fame Pasca, we are going to discuss a study on the Asian celebrity diplomacy led by South Korea and the very well-known Korean boy band, BTS. Next slide, please, ma'am. Okay. So to start, the South Korean boy band BTS career prospered in the music industry in Asia, and the world started to be invited to international occasions to become event and even brand ambassadors. And in effect, their country, the South Korea, also gained international attention in cultural, economic, and political aspects. Particularly, the BTS made an impact on South Korea's diplomatic relations with many countries and organizations such as United Nations. And this is due to the fact that many listens to them, not only to their music, but also to what they proselytize to contribute to mitigating global issues. And as a result, BTS were appointed diplomats in 2021, and this development also redefined diplomacy for the new generation. But the difference is that the BTS is direct diplomat agents of the government, and this way the government itself is simultaneously recognized as a vital part of the process that cannot simply be eclipsed by the stardom. Next slide, please, ma'am. Fame. Next slide, please. The third one. Okay, thank you, ma'am. So in this study, we actually divided the content in five. So first is Beyond the Stardom, where it defines the stars as celebrity diplomats. Second is Between the Stars and Waves, so the Korean waves and its stars' journey to celebrity diplomacy, more like the history of Hallyu Wave and how South Korea leads to this concept. The third one is Boys That Stand Out, where the BTS is the flagship of South Korea Asia's celebrity diplomacy. The fourth one is BTS and Their Soldiers, where we will tackle the army or their fans as a factor to Asia's celebrity diplomacy. And lastly, Be the Solution, where the BTS is Asia's diplomacy as solution provider to the global problems. Next slide, please. Okay. So when we discuss the Beyond the Stardom and stars as celebrity diplomats, one of the age-old problems of diplomacy is the inability to steer emotion in the way that other public activities can. Celebrity diplomacy emphasizes that celebrity diplomats have the ability not only to draw public attention to major causes, but to employ their fame and rhetorical power to intervene into the centers of diplomatic power, where celebrities have the power to frame issues in the manner that attracts visibility and new channels of communication at the mass as well as the elite levels. They actually take an active role in advocating for particular actions or policies related to foreign affairs and can be sorry. Okay, sorry. So they take an active role in advocating for particular actions or policy related to foreign affairs and can be defined as celebrity diplomacy, as per Andrew Cooper, who conceptualized the idea that celebrity diplomacy is an alternative form of agency in which the stars fill with the void in public trust vacated by international political classes, which can say that this type of diplomatic engagement is utilized by the international government organizations such as the United Nations, where the celebrities appointed as United Nations Goodwill Ambassador or Messenger of Peace, and non-governmental organizations such as the Red Cross, Oxfam, and Save the Children, which allow celebrities to represent them. But the concept of celebrity diplomats, however, centers on advocacies of Western, particularly of the Anglosphere, artists, notably U2 lead vocalist Bono Vox, who is well known for being an activist for human rights and social justice causes, which started in 1984. He confounded and raised funds for data, or which known as DEP, AIDS Trade in Africa, through Concert AIDS, and followed by the producing product Red, where Bono teamed up with iconic brands, where portion of buying color red products will be proceeded to donations. And Bono actually became the main idea of Cooper's celebritization of development and Bonoization of diplomacy. And later on, Hollywood actress Angelina Jolie also became known as celebrity diplomat, just like Bono. She was granted the title Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in 2001, and was also nicknamed as the Ambassador Ma'am, as she aids orphan refugees. Actually, her fame is one of the factors why donation for UNHCR spiked by $500,000 after her interview with the CNN. And actually, despite this positive impact of celebrities on diplomacy, there is still debates if celebrity diplomacy has been a good thing, like they are just using this kind of thing to gain audiences, and some say it's illicit and ethnocentric. So next slide, Between the Stars and Wave. So the Between the Stars and Wave, the Korean Waves and its Stars journey to celebrity diplomacy. If we are aware, we all know that the idea of Hallyu Wave, where there is a generation of Korean entertainment that comes with a certain year and what artists, movie, K-drama, or songs are very famous during those times. And like in every wave, there is an artist who improves the concept of celebrity diplomacy through Hallyu. And through the first wave, star Lee Byung-hun is well known in Korea. He is the first wave artist who was appointed as UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in 2003. And his participation was an incredible boost for the nation drives. And then there goes on the second Hallyu wave that has been felt more in music, and the boy band Super Junior was dubbed as the king of Hallyu of second wave. And apart from promoting Korean music, Choi Siwon of Super Junior also worked intensively with children, especially in Vietnam, focusing on efforts on the UNICEF campaign against bullying. And actually, he became UNICEF East Asia and Pacific Regional Ambassador in 2015. And then around 2013, the third wave emerged and still felt up to the present time. So we all know Gong Yoo, where the most of his drama rose on third wave, particularly in 2016 Korean drama Goblin. And he was actually appointed UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador also, as he became interested in actively fighting for children's rights. Okay. And then with the third wave, the South Korean government saw further diplomatic potential of Hallyu, not only in fashion, diet, or lifestyle, but still with music and sound. So sound diplomacy, which is still considered to be understudied, and in South Korea, in particular, sound diplomacy is K-pop diplomacy, which has become their weapon in strengthening its relationship with other countries while promoting its culture at the same time. For example, during the Moon Jae-in administration, he included the idol group Red Velvet in the delegation of musicians who performed at a concert in Pyongyang in 2018. The concert highlights the twinning ties between the rivals of South Korea and North Korea, friction over the North's nuclear program. And At that time, Koreans sang together the song "Our Wish Is Unification," and leader Kim Jong-un clapped his hand and he said he was deeply moved. Coincidentally or not, in April 2018, weeks after the concert, Kim Jong-un declared suspension of nuclear and missile tests and the shutdown of the site where the previous 6 nuclear tests were conducted. And later on, Red Velvet became Goodwill Ambassador for the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies in 2020 for the said annual event designated by the United Nations and led by South Korea. And also in the third wave, it includes the Bangtan Sonyeondan, or we all known as BTS. Similar to many stars of different waves, they work closely with United Nations, particularly with the UNICEF, and became the first K-pop group to speak with the United Nations as UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in an effort to empower young people. So this is just a little activities of BTS on 2017 to 2018. When they have released their album Love Yourself in 2017, they talk about the meaning of true love in songs featured on the album. They entered into partnership with the Korean community for UNICEF, affiliated with United Nations, to sponsor a campaign called End Violence. And UNICEF global campaign aimed to ensuring children and teens in the world lead to safe and healthy lives without the fear of violence. They got also invited to deliver a speech at UN General Assembly in 2018 and speak about empowerment, loving yourself, and loving myself. They have been also featured on the cover of Time magazine as the next generation leaders because of their influence, and were awarded of Order of Cultural Merit by South Korean government for spreading Korean culture and language at the Korean Popular Culture Arts and Awards. So, boys that stand out, BTS a flagship for South Korea Asia celebrity diplomacy. If you have noticed, the celebrities mentioned from the beginning are quite qualified to Cooper's concept of celebrity diplomacy. However, they do not fully realize Cooper's definition of celebrity diplomacy, as they and their works do not involve in their country, the state, or only non-state actors in order to really advocate for policies related to foreign affairs until the emergence of the BTS as celebrity diplomats. BTS, compared to other celebrity diplomats, was appointed as South Korea's special envoy or presidential envoy for future generation and culture, assigned by their own government in promoting their culture. And this made them a direct diplomat agent of South Korea and started to involve their very own country in this particular kind of diplomacy. And having them as a special presidential envoys was actually a technical made possible for the South Korean National Assembly's enactment of 2016 Public Diplomacy Act, as well as the 2020 revision of Military Service Act, known as BTS Law, that the Korean government has set up its vision for public diplomacy as communicating Korea's attractiveness to the entire world. And in 2022, in US President in 2022, Joe Biden met with the PTS at the White House, and they talk about the importance of tackling the anti-Asian racism, showing respect for the Asian community. And he explained that the BTS fan base comes predominantly from Asian regions, which even outnumbers the fan from South Korea and the US, putting into context, it is very keen on establishing closer relation with the regions as discerned from recent developments such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the US-ASEAN Special Summit in May 2022. The collaboration with BTS built on the top of this initiative and is a gesture of Biden's showing friendliness, care, and solidarity to Asian groups and communities beyond US border. So BTS and their soldiers, the army factors to Asia celebrity diplomacy. Not all fans gives off the same and exceed the energy as their idols, but the BTS army or their fans literally devoted fandom with unrevealed level of organization. If once BTS support a certain project or campaign, the army will match it. For example, when the BTS and Big Hit donated $1 million to Black Lives Matter, army or their fans because of their idols' influence, they match the group's donation within 24 hours. There are also environmental projects such as how BTS and company Hyundai became more involved in global environmental trends. That's how devoted they are. And fans are definitely a big factor also on how the celebrities or idols achieve so much to mitigate difficulties and worries even in national or global issues. And the army, meanwhile, are highly engaged and digitally active fandom driven by shared values of world betterment. And lastly, be the solution. The Asia celebrity diplomacy, a solution provider to global problems. So with the presented source we have discussed, it is interesting to note that the Hallyu became an unexpected remedy or solution to 1997 financial crisis experienced by South Korea. As Hallyu proposed or prospered, waves of impact were felt in various aspects, even in diplomacy. It can be said that the phenomenal growth of other cultures reached the point where it can be used as powerful tool for diplomacy the way South Korea is experiencing it today. And with the emergence of the BTS as celebrity diplomats, causes promoted to the public not only became known through their fame as a group of artists, but also became popular through their relatable song. And with that relatively coupled with more concrete action, their sincerity was highlighted, thus it became easy for fans to mobilize, not only idolize, but to support. And for example, again, as mentioned earlier, when the BTS donated 1 million to Black Lives Matter, the group's fans were able to match within 24 hours time period, as mentioned earlier. And the thing about anti-racism. And BTS, as well as its fans, were able to provide solution more visible and accessible to masses. And the Asia's brand celebrity diplomacy that led by South Korea and BTS, therefore, is more on state, celebrity, and fan cooperation, which is more than IGO and GO celebrity, that is founded on relatively eventually on equality between power, fame, or quantity, or every component of society can do something, whatever it contributed, is actually significant. And whether they may be outside their country or simply online can make an impact. So thank you so much for listening. That would be all.
감사합니다. Thank you so much,
감사합니다.
Honey and Fame. So let us continue with our last presenter of the session 1. So our next speaker is Xinyu Li from China, and she's currently a graduate student of Yonsei University, and her first undergraduate major was economics, but later she discovered the charm of the international relations major, and so she was determined to do some exciting and developmental research through the major of international relations. She has been very much concerned about global climate governance issues for the past few years, and she wishes everyone can really work together to study and participate in global environment governance more internationally and efficiently. So Sinyu's presentation is titled The Role of NGOs in Making National Carbon Neutrality Policy, a comparative study of Germany and Japan. So Sinyu, you're ready?
Yes, let me share my screen. Okay, let's start it. Hello everyone, my name is Li Xinyu. Let me introduce me again. I'm from China, and I am studying in about the international relations in Yonsei University. My research topic is the role of NGOs in making national carbon neutrality policies, a comparative case study of Germany and Japan. I hope that after my brief introduction, you can have a useful understanding of my research. Okay, let's start it. I will introduce the research background, research design, framework, and conclusion. If you have any question, please let me know at the end of presentation, or feel free to send email to me. This is a research background. Why did I do this research? I think the environmental problem is a matter of survival, life. Also, it is not mainstream in international relations or political science. But now, even environmental problem can affect the political direction. We can also see various international conferences and treaties in the field of the environment, as well as disputes between the countries caused by cross-border pollution or means transboundary pollution. What is the carbon neutrality research? Before carbon neutrality, we should know the word carbon peak. That means the carbon emission achieved to the highest level. The sum of all the emission and consumption after that add up to the zero. So about how to achieve it, such as by planting trees and adopting policies to limit the factory emissions and so on. Achieve carbon neutrality is a goal of each country. As early as the United Nations Climate Conference in 2015, various countries proposed that they would set a target. Most developed countries have set a goal for 2050. By this year, they will achieve carbon neutrality. This is massive challenging for industrial countries. So as you know, Japan and Germany are the object of my research today. This is my research design. My research question is, why is Germany's environmental government's target higher than Japan's target? Why Germany proposed to achieve carbon neutrality in 2045 and Japan plans to complete in 2050? So my independent variable is the role of non-government organization, and the dependent variable is different carbon neutralization goals. My hypothesis here is the most is the more active of environmental NGOs, the more they can influence the government environmental decision making. Here you can say the research method of the research is the most similar case study. It is very common method in comparative research. At least we need to select at least two very similar cases, compare their data, and find out the important factors that determine their difference within certain comparative range. So I made this comparison table. From this table, you can see that many environmental indicators in these two countries are very similar. I try to prove through data that these two countries can use to comparative research on the environment issues. The two countries are similar in terms of national size, population, and carbon emissions. I noticed one thing here. The People's Climate Vote public belief in the climate emergency, Japan's survey's results are higher than Germany's. Therefore, I guess Japanese citizens are also very concerned about climate change. And next, this is alternative variables. First possible independent variable is the leader. Higher climate requirements means more environment pressure. And even if leaders make such a proposal, it is easily be rejected. Therefore, I don't think leader as a reason. And somebody think EU is can influence to the Germany, but most of EU countries, they are still targeting in 2050. Therefore, I don't think EU is an independent variable. Here, research design. The journey story is that 9 young people are dissatisfied with the climate action law. They believe that this law cannot protect the future generation. It cannot protect everyone's environmental rights for a long time. The 9 young people appealed to the court to ask the government to improve the climate law, meaning to protect the future generation. Of course, these 9 young people are the member of the NGO, BUND and Future Friday. I found some several information from the Facebook and Twitter. If I can make some interview of them, that will be very beneficial to my research, but I didn't. Here, the Germany Parliament passed the law soon after receiving such a request. After advent of this law, the environment made more legal environmental requirements and then changed the net national carbon neutrality time to advance in 2045. I made this follow chart for your understanding. The table below is also a reference framework I have summarized based on the case of Germany. Another case is Japan. Japan's climate goal established process is very traditional, it's very normal. First, Abe put forward the goal of carbon peak by 2030 as a climate conference. Suga, who is the chief cabinet secretary, supported the Abe government for nearly 8 years. This, of course, also includes the environment policy. Suga put forward the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. This proposal was approved by the National Day of Japan. And since then, local government in Japan have easily started publicity in various places. In this case, some scholars point out that in Japan, there are fewer reports on climate change without major international conference and agreements. Therefore, Japan's environment protection plan is decided by the government, and it is very difficult for citizens to participate in it. So this is very normal top-down decision-making process. It is very common. Most countries have determined their carbon neutrality goals in this way, this top-down decision-making. And here is conclusion. Through these 2 cases, it proves the important influence of NGOs on environmental decision-making. I try to build a decision path that affects the policy of NGOs. NGO can define their own interest by putting pressure on judges, on putting pressure on the government. In fact, in many cases, NGOs are not strong enough to resist the government. We have seen the success of the German case, but we cannot ignore the impact of the overall German social environment on NGO support and the citizen voluntary concern of the environment issues. Here is a 2 table of the Germany NGO and Japan NGOs. And this is reference. Okay, that's all. Thank you for listening and thank you for your time.
네, 감사합니다. Thank you so much, Sing-yu. So we just finished listening to 3 presentations of session 1, and now we will continue with some discussion points that will be raised by Dr. Marshall Murillo. So let me just briefly introduce our first discussant to all of you. Dr. Marshall Murillo is an associate professor of public administration at the Graduate School and the Social Sciences Department in Ateneo de Naga University in Naga City, Philippines. So he teaches public administration at both graduate and undergraduate levels, and he's a program director of the Masters in Public Administration and Business Administration cluster of Ateneo de Naga University's graduate school, and he's an active member of his university's Social Involvement Council and Research Council. So previously, he earned his PhD in public administration, majoring in administrative management from the Huazhong University of Science and Technology in Wuhan, China in 2019. He was awarded a full scholarship grant under the Chinese government scholarship Chinese University program. The scholarship supported senior administrators from ASEAN members countries in pursuing postgraduate studies in public administration, including administrative management, land resources management, and e-government and non-traditional security. So we will welcome Dr. Marshall Murillo to give some comments, and our session one speakers, if your camera works, you can also turn on your camera and just look at each other. So Marshall.
Thank you, Doc May. And congratulations to the lady, to all our researchers, and it's for the generosity to share their interesting findings. Well, I'm given limited time to share some of my comments or also insights. No, I think I also have a couple of questions to our presenters this morning. So first, the research about the crisis of democracy in Myanmar, the limitation of ASEAN and influence of South Korea. Well, there's a lot of to unpack from the research, the research presentation. It's also fascinating that Ms. Yerim Lee were able to identify the contribution of Korean pop culture to Myanmar's democracy. But I'd like to focus my comment on the seemingly limitations of the ASEAN organization, or the regional organization, because on the get-go, I think as an observer of the crisis in Myanmar, I thought that ASEAN has been paralyzed since the coup. No, they consumed as we all know, as mentioned by Yerim, the coup was consumed when infighting, offering weak responses to the junta, and demonstrating obviously the inability to shift messages. And I remember with Cambodia serving as ASEAN chair in 2022, the Prime Minister basically initially welcomed this general back into the ASEAN fold, and made several symbolic gestures. So in other words, to me, to do anything meaningful about Myanmar, ASEAN must really abandon the stale peace plan, and openly admit that the plan is not really helpful, in taking much stronger actions against the Naypyidaw regime because of its increasing brutality happening in their own country. So I'm really curious if Yerim can generously share later on if the research also offers options how ASEAN as well as the South Korean government can really help the political crisis in Myanmar, because I think there are several opinions and comments coming from international experts about this. I want to hear perhaps any evidence, if there is any proof that this situation will be well facilitated by the new ASEAN organization, now that it is being chaired by Indonesia. On the second research, the Peace Solution, the BTS, a study on the ASEAN celebrity diplomacy led by South Korea and its boy band BTS. It's really interesting that we're bringing back the conversation about the role of celebrity diplomacy, especially in the 21st century foreign policy. And we all know BTS is very much instrumental to this particular discourse. And what we see is also that there is obviously a deep, intractable problems and crises affecting our world today. And these are optimally addressed by several tools and resources. And we see celebrity diplomacy represents basically only one of this particular, only one or among those tools available. Again, to me, as a teacher of public administration, I'd like to see I'd like to see and see celebrity diplomacy as one of those component or any strategy to basically raise awareness and focus to societal attention on humanitarian issues and conflict resolutions. My question here, I think Ms. Hani mentioned a while ago Anderson Cooper. So it was interesting because even before I was invited by Doc Bay about this particular about this online event, I read about Anderson Cooper's term called glamorous enthusiast. No, it means that superstar basically use their celebrity status to advocate for certain causes, but on an ad hoc basis. No, and they mentioned about Bono. No, he was successful in attracting more attention to the issues, and even state leaders themselves were able to become more aware of some certain issues raised by Bono. I'm curious whether your opinion about this, Miss Honey, and your partner is you think celebrity diplomacy is more than just a passing trend, and why kaya? No, because there are obviously international relations experts or theories that still looks and skeptic about this particular strategy, or they call it conceptual consideration in pushing for the 21st century foreign policy. And lastly, Ms. Xin Huli, the role of NGOs in making national carbon neutrality policy. It's a good case study here. We have Germany and Japan. As we all know, they basically contribute to, they committed to achieve carbon neutrality. And it's good that they are part of this discussion. Well, the thing is, I think I'm familiar with only two approaches of NGOs in terms of campaigning action that would minimize obviously the human and environmental impacts of climate change. One is they seek to engage governments and corporations through lobbying, and the second one was about introducing changing behaviors. I'd like to know, Shinyu, if in the Japanese and German case studies, are these two approaches present, and can you also provide us an evidence to say that this or there any hybrid approach in pushing for in promoting carbon neutrality? Because obviously they're important actors in this campaign, but often some critics look at the NGOs as just an added value. They don't really provide a significant impact to the policy making process, especially that this particular issue was heavily put on government and private sector. I think because you have limited time to present your paper, perhaps you can introduce to us to several approaches in campaigning carbon neutrality in the case of Japan and in Germany. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm more of a student here rather than a discussant, because I'm really curious on the research findings of our researchers here. That's it from me, Doc Bay.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Marcia Murillo. And then all the speakers, all the presenters, you can, I'm sure you took note of questions or comments by Dr. Marshall. So during the open forum, after the session 2 is done, we can all gather, and then you can respond, or you can also raise questions to other speakers. So at this moment, let us continue with session 2. So the first speaker, we have 3 speakers for session 2, and let me just introduce our first speaker from Yonsei University. So Ms. Hyunji Jo is currently a master's degree student in the Department of International Relations at Yonsei University. She entered university in the fall semester in 2021. Her bachelor's degree is also international relations from Yonsei University Mira campus. So she also established the Global Citizenship Education Center with her university colleagues in 2018. Because she's been teaching in middle school and high school since 2019, and it certainly shows that she's really enthusiastic in global citizenship education. So Hyunji's presentation is titled Factors Driving the New Southern Policy, focusing on the peace leadership of President Moon Jae-in. So let us meet Hyunji.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wei. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Oh, okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Hyunji from Yonsei University. Thank you for this opportunity. This is my first time online seminar, so I'm very nervous now. So the word and sentence used in the presentation material may not be natural, may not be smooth. I ask for your understanding in advance. What I'm going to talk about today is leadership of Moon Jae-in. Some of you may already know his name. He is the last president of Korea. My topic is factors driving the new Southern policy, focusing on peace leadership of President Moon Jae-in. I will divide my presentation in 5 parts: introduction, theoretical review, bodies, conclusion. Introduction is here. Korea is a country adopting a presidential system. Therefore, I thought that the president's personality, value, knowledge, and experience, and so on, had a great influence on policy making. My research question is here. Why did the Moon Jae-in government pursue the ASEAN New Southern policy? I can interview Moon Jae-in, so I adopted literature and data research as a research method. Next part is review or theoretical background and previous studies. As you can see in this table, the definition of leadership is as numerous as various as number of people who have attempted to define it. Next part is leadership of president. As much research is being conducted on the present leadership as it is on the definition of leadership, and it is still one of the important topics of the discussions. Ham Sung-deuk said it is necessary to study characteristics of president's personal leadership because the president's influence is large in the process of making policies. Baba said we can understand presidents well, especially by observing their personalities. According to Baba's formula, 2 aspects are important. The first thing is energy, and second thing is the level of personal satisfaction. So he created 4 types and explained the strengths and improvement points of each. Through Baba's concept and literature research, I classified the type of president of the Korea. So I thought Moon Jae-in was an active, positive type of president. Next part is previous study. It's about personality, leadership, characteristics, and leadership and policy. The purpose of this study is to clarify the relationship between the characteristics of presidential leadership and policy making. Ham Sung-deuk noticed that each president has one characteristic which affect the government policies. Kim Hyuk studied how to influence the police agenda according to personal qualities such as worldview and values, experience, and so on. Next part is previous study discourse analysis. I found previous study that knowledge, belief, identity, and so on can be implied through text, and I use discourse analysis method in my research design to support peace leadership of Moon Jae-in. The third part is leadership formation of Moon Jae-in. He was born on January 24th, 1953, while living in refugee due to the outbreak of the Korean War. He lived in poverty and read a lot. In his autobiography, he mentioned that he developed himself through books. He was a good student in high school, but he also deviated from the high school second grade. But he was a righteous man who helped his friend well. He entered the law department of Kyunghee University, and he was participated in the movement of democratization. In 1982, he worked with Roh Moo-hyun as a human rights lawyer. Roh Moo-hyun was the 16th president of Korea. They fought injustice as human rights lawyer, and Moon Jae-in believed came to claim fairness. 18th President Park Geun-hye's impeachment made Moon Jae-in in the only alternative to Korean policy. Therefore, specific vision and keynote are not properly prepared. The actual national stance and task inherit a large part of Roh Moo-hyun government. The Moon Jae-in government had a great learning effect on the failure of Park Geun-hye government to respond to the crisis. Next part is peaceful leadership of Moon Jae-in. I examined the presidential speech to support Moon Jae-in's peace leadership. The reason why the president's speech was selected as an analysis target is that it is a clear data that can confirm the present policy direction, values, and emphasis. Therefore, I adopted word of peace as the main keyword and investigated the frequency of peace in his speech. I arranged the speech that include the word of peace. I translated some content into English. Can you see the orange color letters? That is 평화. 평화 means peace in Korea. In the president's inaugural address, he said, I will be constantly on the move for peace on the Korean Peninsula. I will do everything to achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula. He also mentioned peace in his New Year address in 2018. Information related to Southeast Asia is marked with a blue scale box. In his special speech in Singapore and UN General Assembly, he mentioned this North Korea nuclear issue and hoped that North Korea would return to the path of peace. He also referred to the Community for Peace and Cooperation. He addressed the South Asian leaders' commitment to work together for complete denuclearization and permanent peace on Korean Peninsula. Also, you can see he always mentioned peace in his New Year's address every year. In order to investigate the relationship between leadership and peace, I conducted discourse analysis. In 5 years of his major speeches, he mentioned the word of peace about 200 times. The study aimed to examine the impact of Moon Jae-in's peace leadership on the policymaking process, and peace discourse can be said to be the basis of this study. As can be seen from Moon Jae-in's main discourse on peace, it is no exaggeration to say that Moon Jae-in cannot be defined without peace. Fourth part is New Southern policy and peace leadership. He officially declared the New Southern policy in his keynote speech at the Korea-Indonesia Business Forum. The 3 major slogans of New Southern policies are peace, prosperity, and people. ASEAN is a region where the peace leadership works beyond the Korean Peninsula. ASEAN has still established diplomatic and economic ties with North Korea. Therefore, President Moon Jae-in wanted to continue to involve North Korea as a member of international communities along with ASEAN. ASEAN is the area where his peace leadership was demonstrated, striving to build peace on the Korean Peninsula. And finally, we reached conclusion. This study attempted to suggest that present leadership has a great significance in Korea, which adopted the presidential system, and the leadership characteristic can affect policy. Peace influences his leadership characteristic, which is also correlated with policy setting. Text analysis is conducted in various areas, such as vocabulary, grammar, and text structure, so more detailed research needs follow-up. His peace leadership characteristic to include North Korea as a member of international committee through the ASEAN cooperation and bring peace on the Korean Peninsula, lead to the New Southern policy, along with the 3P slogan to strengthen cooperation with the ASEAN region. Here is my reference. That's all I have prepared today. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hyunji, for very insightful and very comprehensive presentation. So what follows is a Filipino student from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So let me introduce our next speaker, Joshua Emmanuel T. Ramos. So Joshua is a Master in International Studies student at the Department of Political Science of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is currently at the thesis stage of the program, and he graduated with a degree in philosophy summa cum laude from the same university. Since 2019, he has been working for a member of the Philippines House of Representatives as a legislative researcher and writer. His research interests include gender in IR, democratic erosion, and nationalism. So today, Joshua's presentation is titled Gender and National Interests, Framing of the Comfort Women Issue in the Philippine Legislature. So let us meet Joshua.
Thank you, Dr. Bay. Good day to all, to the discussants, presenters, friends from the Yonsei University as well as University of the Philippines. Thank you for the opportunity to present this paper, which is actually to clarify a research proposal draft for my master's thesis. So I have yet to finish my study. What I'm presenting are bits of my proposal and some key findings in the current literature. So my thesis advisor, Dr. Jean Franco of the UP Department of Political Science, suggested that I present in this workshop because of the subject matter of my study, the quote-unquote comfort women issue, which we know to be an ongoing diplomatic concern for both the Philippines and Korea, well, for differing degrees, I suppose. So for today, what I think would be relevant to this workshop is the comparison in my thesis proposal between the literature in both countries, as well as a general idea of my thesis proposal and its significance for the fight for the just reparation of comfort women survivors. So unlike the presentations before mine, I would end my presentation today with my research question. So as we all know, among the long-standing diplomatic conflicts in this part of the world would be the comfort women issue. Up until today, even amidst the global pandemic and the impending global recession, this issue has not failed to draw the attention of the media as well as spark public interest. This is because the survivors and their families still yearn for just reparation for the comfort women. We could trace the roots of the comfort stations to the Japanese brothels in China in the 1930s before the Second World War began. They set it up to prevent the rape of civilians, and they intended it initially to be managed by professional sex workers. But when the Second World War erupted, they needed more women due to the increased demand, such that voluntary participation to the comfort women industry could not suffice anymore. Other reasons for the establishment of the comfort stations include the need to boost men's morale in the battlefield, to control the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, and to discourage the use of private brothels where military secrets back then could be compromised. So the comfort stations were established essentially to fuel the war machinery of the Japanese Imperial Army. According to empirical studies, there were about 70 to 200,000 comfort women, of which 80% came from Korea. The rest were from Japan, China, Taiwan, and the Philippines, among others. The San Francisco Peace Treaty, which effectively settled the Second World War, is silent on the plight of these women. For almost half a century since the war ended, these victims would be forgotten. Then in 1991, a Korean survivor by the name of Kim Hak-soon came out and testified in public that she was in fact a comfort women survivor. In 1993, the Japanese government, in what is now known as the Kono Statement, admitted that the Japanese Imperial Army was involved in establishing and maintaining comfort stations. Well, now different countries have responded to the issue differently, and the literature, in effect, in various countries have had varied focuses. So the first is the literature in Korea. The literature in Korea is quite comprehensive in scope. It ranges from personal histories of the comfort women survivors to the nature of the just reparation that these survivors need and how best to attain these desired outcomes. For starters, the literature in Korea explains why we put the term comfort women in quotes. One Korean study looked at the different ways by which Korean comfort women were being silenced. And one of those ways is through the term we label them with, which is comfort women. The invention of the term comfort women attempted to silence these women by trying to mask the atrocities that they have suffered. Because we could not at first glance know from the label comfort women the sufferings that they have gone through. So much so that it would appear from this label that the victims voluntarily worked at the comfort stations, which incidentally, many Japanese neo-nationalists still assert until today. But because it has been the convention to use the term comfort women, we use it, but we put it in quotes to signify our protest against its use. For my study, which I will briefly discuss later, the relevant chunk of the literature is the ways by which comfort women issue is being framed in public. Entman defines framing as making more salient an aspect of a perceived reality to promote a particular problem definition, causal interpretation, moral evaluation, and or treatment recommendation for the item being described. And guided by this definition, one Korean scholar, Pak, studied liberal and conservative newspapers in Japan and Korea to observe the changes in the framings of these news outlets. She was able to conclude that when the relationship between Japan and Korea turned sour, conflict and morality framings have been abandoned. But when the relationship between Japan and Korea is favorable, human interest frames were ample. In another study, two Korean scholars examined 20,000 newspaper articles from both countries to look at how the media covered the comfort women issue since the 2015 agreement on the comfort women was signed. These scholars were able to identify that the signing of the comfort women agreement in 2015 was a key historical turning point when, from the usual nationalist and feminist framings, the media in Korea began to incorporate class, gender, and transnational dimensions in the presentation of their news narratives. Finally, another scholar tried to identify the reason for the sympathy of the international media towards Korean victims, even though the foreign press had more outlets in Tokyo than in Seoul. Apparently, because the foreign press had more outlets in Tokyo, they were more attuned to the issues of contemporary Japan, including human trafficking. So they were able to appreciate the issue, and they actually tackled the comfort women issue in the context of human trafficking in Japan. Moreover, the petitions, the legal petitions of the Korean survivors were submitted before the courts in Tokyo. So as a consequence, the foreign press had an affinity with the Korean survivors. So those were the main points from the Korean literature. The literature on comfort women in the Philippines is far from abundant, as we have seen in the case of Korea, although some insightful articles have been published here. I have observed that in the Philippines, works on comfort women focus on two aspects. First, they answer how the survivors themselves frame their own experiences. So for instance, one UP professor described the rhetoric of the survivors and analyzed its meanings and goals. Another scholar sought to write history from the point of view of the comfort women survivors. It's important to note here the use of oral history in the production of these studies because number one, there is a dearth of documentary evidence on the issue, and number two, oral history foregrounds the voice of those who have been rendered voiceless by many factors in society. The second aspect of the Philippine literature on comfort women delves on how the comfort women movement in the Philippines frames the comfort women's experiences and how they pursue reparation. I surmise that this is one of the focuses in the Philippine literature because it was actually the Philippine civil society that exposed the comfort women controversy in the Philippines. For example, Lola Rosa Henson, a Filipino comfort woman survivor, narrated in her autobiography that it was actually the call for survivors of a certain Lady Alejandro of the group Bayan that actually moved her to speak up and open up about her past. So those are the main points that we can learn from the literature of Korea and the Philippines as far as this proposed study is concerned. I noticed that in both countries, scholars hardly look at how elected officials, especially members of parliament, frame the comfort women issue. They only look, if they do so, at the executive and judiciary. In the Philippines, for example, I could find no study focusing on legislative actions regarding the comfort women issue. They always look at the executive branch, which I think is only logical given that the president is the chief architect of our foreign policy. There are some articles that also mention the judiciary, our Supreme Court, because the survivors once in the past sued the executive branch for inaction in their plight. And in a decision named Vinuya versus Executive Secretary, the Philippine Supreme Court ruled that it cannot force the Philippine executive branch to act on political matters, including foreign relations. So their hands were tied. Yet, I believe that the legislature is a vital part of government, and the words of the members of legislature matter because they possess force, and in some cases, they are actually representative of the voices of their constituencies. This branch of government has a say on foreign policy matters, given that it has the power of the purse. Number two, the Philippine Senate ratifies our treaties. And number three, in general, government actions are accountable to their parliaments, to their legislatures or congresses. And members of Congress, in general, are expected to contribute to resolving complex foreign policy and international issues impacting its citizens. So I argue that it is fruitful to ask, and this is my research question, how Philippine senators and members of the House of Representatives frame the comfort women issue. But here's a question, but in what context? In the context of the economic might of Japan. From the point of view of liberal economics, one of the many causes of the economic ills of the Philippines, our country, is that it is undercapitalized. And so we need foreign direct investments coming from foreign countries to stimulate our businesses and grow our economy. That's why many studies show that the Japan-Philippine Economic Partnership Agreement, or JPEPA, proved to have positive effects for our exports and our economy in general. Japan also has an impressive official development assistance portfolio in the Philippines, which takes the form of loans, but without the political conditions that we usually see from the official development assistance coming from Western countries. I believe that in 2021, the Department of Foreign Affairs reported that Japan is the biggest ODA giver to the Philippines. Moreover, since last week, since President Marcos visited Japan, we have been hearing about the possibility of a defense alliance between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines, which is controversial as far as the comfort women are concerned, because they are against the remilitarization of Japan, given its complicated history. So the short answer to my question earlier, in what context, is that I would like to study how members of Congress frame the comfort women issue in the context of the strong and beneficial relationship that the Philippines and Japan have. Essentially, it is a gender topic because it looks at how the Philippine leaders incorporate Filipino women, especially comfort women survivors, in their formulation of the Philippine national interests. Note that national interests are not objective facts in nature that we are supposed to discover. National interests are constructed through discourse. And so I'd like to study the representations of the comfort women in the discourses in Congress amidst the tremendous benefits that the country receives from Japan. I'm happy to note that a Korean professor at the Bush School of Government and Public Service is working on a similar topic with focus on the South Korean National Assembly. Thank you all for listening. Mabuhay and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for this very important topic. It's quite interesting to hear from a Filipino scholar to talk about comfort women issue in relation to Korea. So let us welcome our last speaker today. So our last speaker is Jasmine Sabrina Rombawa, and Jasmine is currently studying language education at the College of Education in UP Diliman. So Jas is an instructor of communication research in the Department of Communication of Ateneo de Manila University. She graduated BA Communication Arts major in writing, cum laude in UP Los Baños, and master's degree from education in language education in UP Diliman. She is interested in Korean language, Korean media culture, and education technology, and the intersections of communication and education. So her presentation today is titled Adult Filipino Korean as a Foreign Language Learners, Online Learning Readiness, and Foreign Language Learning Effort. So let us meet Jas.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right, thank you so much. So good day, everyone. I'm Jasmine Rambawa. I'm a PhD education student, and I'm due to take my comprehensive examination this semester, and will be pursuing research titled Adult Filipino Korean Language Learners Online Learning Readiness and Foreign Language Learning Effort. So foreign language learning is gaining popularity in the Philippines across ages, but I am focusing on adult language learners, and according to studies, Filipino foreign language learners who are like Filipino adult foreign language learners have aspirations to work outside of the country. So specifically, KFL learners is gaining KFL as a language is gaining popularity among Filipinos. In terms of online language learning, we see that web-based courses have been in existence prior to the pandemic. However, there was a growth in the trend of using online learning during the pandemic due to lockdowns. Here, we also discovered and relearned features of the online learning when it comes to opportunities for learning, as well as interactions with fellow learners from different countries or different places all over the world. However, we also see studies stating unsatisfactory impacts of learning online. Most of this is because of learners' readiness and motivation. Now, foreign language learning effort is also studied in this research, and it stems from the concept of learning effort, which is the mental exertion of or willingness to insist on accomplishing a task. Scales have been designed to measure learning and language learning effort, but foreign language learning effort is quite explicit with what it is trying to measure. And so Karabig and Ricci came up with an instrument to measure this, which I used for this study. For this research, I asked the following questions. Is there a significant difference in the online learning readiness of adult Filipino KFL learners depending on their background? Is there a significant difference in the online learning readiness and foreign language learning effort of adult Filipino KFL learners? Is there a significant difference between the factors related to online language learning readiness among adult Filipino KFL learners, and also the same question in terms of foreign language learning effort among adult Filipino KFL learners? Now, this study was conducted from November 21 to December 11, 2022, among 57 KFL learners, Filipino KFL learners, who were reached through social media posts, through Facebook and Twitter. I thank UP KRC for helping me distribute this survey as well. The respondents that I was able to gather were mostly composed of female adult KFL learners, and also most of them are from 21 to 30-year-olds. Most of them were also undergraduate students, and that's why they're from the academe. Finally, 67% of them learned Korean formally, meaning through classes, whether online or on-site. So in this study, non-formal students were those who learned the language through Duolingo, self-study, or videos online. Coursera, Udemy, and other MOOCs are regarded as formal courses for this study. So those who learned Korean on those platforms were considered formal learners. So this study complies with the ethical standards of the Philippines, and proper information was provided to the participants prior to answering the survey. They were also allowed to opt out of the study at any point. So to determine the online learning readiness, I used the Online Learner Readiness Scale developed by Hung et al. In 2010. So the instrument was pre-validated, but for the study, I still tested for its consistency, and it shows that the instrument has good internal consistency. So the instrument looks into self-directed learning, motivation for learning, computer or internet self-efficacy, learner control, and online communication self-efficacy as factors that comprise online learning readiness. Foreign language learning effort was measured using the instrument of Karabik and Mirichi developed in 2018, which I mentioned earlier. Again, the instrument has been validated before and was still tested for consistency in this study, yielding to acceptable internal consistency overall and good internal consistency based on standardized items. The instrument measures non-compliance effort, procedural effort, substantive effort, and focal effort. Since the measures of this instrument are not applicable to non-formal learners, only 38 respondents answered this instrument. Let's now proceed to the results of the study. So for the first research question to measure the difference of readiness depending on the learner's background, I used Mann-Whitney-U test for gender and Kruskal-Wallace test for age group, occupation, field. So the result of the test shows that all of them, of the participants, which is similar to the results compare language learning readiness and foreign language learning effort, I used the Wilcoxon signed rank test. So the results the foreign language learning effort. Because of the negative connotations among the respondents in the statements in that factor. I could not just remove this for final analysis as it may affect the consistency of the instrument, but still tested it anyway. I'll show the response later on. The results later on. Note that non-compliance effort measures unruly behavior like distracting the class and cheating. But the original developers of this instrument still considered non-compliance as an effort towards language learning. So based on my curiosity, I came up with an alternative computation, which shows that there's no significant difference between the two. Online learning readiness and foreign language learning effort are both high among these learners. What can we say about this? That these adult KFL Filipino learners are both ready to learn online, and that they have high for foreign language learning effort. Note that when it comes to effort, that's effort within attending a certain class for foreign language. So I also wanted to look into the factors or dimensions within both scales. And for that, I used Friedman two-way analysis of variance. So with that, we see that there is a significant difference among mean scores of these factors of our online learning readiness scale. So in this table, we see the difference pairwise among self-directed learning or the SDL, motivation for learning or MFL, computer internet self-efficacy or CIS, learner control, which I coded LC, and online communication self-efficacy, I coded OCS. We just see that there's no significant difference comparing motivation for learning and computer internet self-efficacy, as well as online communication self-efficacy and self-directed learning. So I did the same for the foreign language learning effort and compared the factors or dimensions that make up the instrument. So the results show that there is a statistically significant difference among the domains of NCE or non-compliance effort, procedural effort or PE, substantive effort or SE, and focal effort, which was coded FE. However, there is no significant difference comparing procedural effort and substantive effort, as procedural effort has something to do with complying with the procedures of the lessons, and substantive effort has something to do with effort in understanding the substance or the lessons in class. Procedural effort also has no significant difference with focal effort, which has something to do with focusing on the lessons during a class. So to conclude, there is no significant difference in the online learning readiness among the adult Filipino KFL learners across backgrounds. There is a difference between online learning readiness and foreign language learning effort driven by non-compliance. And lastly, the dimensions that construct both tests are significantly different among each other, meaning they do not directly influence or affect each other. So based on this, I have the following recommendations. The foreign language learning efforts scale measures efforts of foreign language learners in a formal classroom environment alone. Updating the instrument or developing an instrument inclusive to those who are learning the foreign language non-formally may help explore language learning in an online and self-directed mode. This may also be to better compare foreign language learning effort with online language learning readiness, especially because a lot of online language learners right now are learning their language self-paced or foreign language self-paced. The online language readiness scale measures readiness, but do not take into consideration economic factors as well as factors related to social status and environment outside of the learning setting, which may also contribute to actual online learning readiness. Future researchers may conduct analysis using different instrument or that also measures online readiness that includes the said factors, or also develop their own instrument for this. Now, I have also some things I have noted that I or other researchers could do moving forward. Future research may use instruments to determine learning effort and online learning readiness of participants, but focus more on the other aspects of participants' learning rather than only the instruments and the factors they look into. Okay, instruments may also be used to measure effort and readiness prior to analyzing other learning factors in an exploratory study. The instruments may be used as a demographic initial study as well for my future dissertation titled Intercultural Competence and Identity of Adult Filipino KFL Learners, Utilization of Virtual Environment Affordances in Foreign Language Learning. So that is it for my presentation. Thank you very much. Here are some of my references.
Thank you so much, Jas. This is to wrap up our last presentation. So to formally close session 2, we will also invite our second discussant. Let me introduce Dr. Aldrin Lee to all of you. Dr. Aldrin Lee is an associate professor of the Department of Linguistics in UP Diliman. His teaching and research areas include grammatical description, morphosyntactic analysis, generative grammar, ethnolinguistics, and linguistic fieldwork, language documentation, lexicography, and Korean linguistics and cultural studies. He has published articles in several journals, including the Philippine Social Science Review, Cognition, and the Journal of Global and Area Studies. And at present, his research projects include inquiries on the relationship between language and nature, particularly on island linguistics, and a Korean Tagalog parallel corpus translation project funded by the National Institute of Korean Language. He is currently the president of the Linguistic Society of the Philippines until 2023. So let us welcome Dr. Lee.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Be, for that extensive introduction. I'm actually not very confident to discuss all the papers this morning because some of them are not really within my expertise, except for the fact that, I had an entering degree in international Korean studies when I actually dealt with a number of courses about Korean culture, society, and Korean history. So my perspective, I in my comment. So listening as much as I joined the presentation, it's having a hard catching up with the discussion was a little too long some of our speakers more. I actually you sharing your research and me also huge comments that I not my comment. I will just mention I wish the answer by so my or so talking about factors driving the new Southern policy, using the peace leadership of President Moon Jae-in. I was really interested about how she defined leadership in her paper. But I was also looking back at another term that's how overlaps with leadership. I think it would be nice for her to actually also mention about this club for readers. Her definition of leadership is something that is really like individual personality of the leader, or might also referring to statecraft, overall stance, attitude, or of leader. I believe that the word statecraft is also being used, in the context of study in politics. So I hope that the Hyunji later on, whether graph could be an alternative term for their paper or not. At the states of her discussion, I was actually having a hard time because she slide, and I wish that there was actually enough to also read the slides. But I listened. She later, answered. I mean, I'm curious what kind actually use in the discourse analysis, and she answered it later. Regard, I was hoping that seeing the potential of her work in expanding it into analysis by looking at the figurative data used, explain further the concept of peace as an abstract concept, and it viewed it in every the leader would actually be mentioning. So it was like hoping that Hyunji could actually metaphors, how metaphors were used for Moon Jae to actually, you know, manifest or express perspective that he has with regard to the concept. I think it help us understand, you know, the leadership that she was trying to describe in her paper. And of course, so wanted to put it in, in context of the fact that is also affected by their affiliation. So I think it's one thing that I somehow missed in the presentation. In the revisions later, you could also take that into consideration and include in the first part for discussion. And then next presentation, this one by Joshua, he discussed the framings of the conflict women issue in the Philippine legislature and in the context of gender and national interest. And I understand this is going to be his thesis proposal. I find it interesting. He actually challenged, the norm for women and how the use of it, how muted the and like the abilities we wish, could have been rendered by the part the Japan in particular. So, for example, reparation or in terms of penalties that they must bear, because we know that this is actually just a sort of euphemism for a grave abuse against women during wartime. So I really like that part of Joseph's presentation. I really appreciate that. I know that comfort as a modifier of women is associated with positive notions. So technically, if we don't know, history or what really happened, when we use comfort, we will take it, more positively. And somehow I think that lessens the impact, of how we imagined abuses, the gravity of the abuses that were committed against women during the wartime. And the same term in Korean is actually used, wianbu. Wian is also comfort. I'm curious about any Filipino term, Tagalog term, or any sort of metaphor or analogy that was used to actually describe comfort women in the Philippine context. During wartime, it's not only women, but like all the vulnerable sectors would suffer a lot, children, and other marginalized groups. So in the context of the Philippines, aside from comfort women, I know there were comfort gays as well, diba? So yeah, I'm really curious if there were like sort of explications of the term comfort women in the context of the Philippine experience. And then the second point I would like to impart would be, the discussion of comfort women in relation to the crimes and abuses against women in general. So I think we know how much, crimes and abuses were committed and were being committed against women in the history of these countries. In the case of Korea, I had a chance to study the crimes and abuses of Korean women during the early Chosun by looking at early documents, and I was stunned. I was so surprised by like the nature of the crimes and the abuses reported ones. No, these were the reported ones. So I have no access to the unreported crimes and abuses against women in general. But yes, we know that it's hard to isolate or dissociate comfort women discussion from like the discussion of crimes and abuses against women in general. And I'm kind of expecting this in the thesis of Joshua, later on, that he would probably be including a general discussion about the prolonged history of repeated cyclical, sometimes organized, crimes and abuses against women in these societies, in the Philippines and in Korea and in Japan. And then, of course, Joshua mentioned about this. Japan's economic status is, the state leverage in comfort women negotiations. And I'm expecting that this is also a big factor in terms of how comfort women is being discussed in the legislature, right? So I'm excited to see, the methodology that Joshua would actually use later on when he would start to discuss about how the legislative branch would actually be discussing comfort women, or how comfort women is framed, in the discussions in Congress. That would be really exciting too. And I'm looking forward to that. Okay, and the last paper is by Jasmine. This is about adult Filipino Korean foreign language learners online readiness and foreign language learning effort, some sort of scales, that we used to actually measure certain capacities and motivations in terms of Filipinos, adult Filipinos learning Korean as a foreign language. I have a few more points to Jasmine's presentation, I think, because generally she covered more in her paper, and I could see that this is like a part of the big work, a big project later on. She mentioned that this is going to be her dissertation as well. So, but yes, like Hyunji, I also had a hard time trying to follow Jaz's presentation because she discussed quite, her discussion was quite fast-paced, I think because of the time constraint. And there were like a number of slides that I wish I could see more, like the slides on the objectives. I was only able to pick up a few. But generally, I was like kind of concerned about possible overlaps in the terms that are being used. For example, when we speak about online learning versus classroom-based learning, because we could also use the term classroom in a virtual sense, so I was like maybe thinking that there might be a better like sort of opposite term for online learning. So I'm expecting this to be like a part of Jasmine's discussion. I would just like to raise it as early as now to be careful about potential overlaps in terms of the terms that are being used. And she mentioned about the background of the participants, in the surveys that she's conducted. I was like kind of curious about background because she identified gender, occupation, age, and field. So I was like kind of wanting to actually listen to her rationalization of this. Like, are there literatures actually support that these are the most important dimensions to actually encompass the background? Because we know that when we speak of background, it is culture sensitive, possibly very subjective, She mentioned in the latter part of her discussion, though, that there were some factors like economic and, the sociocultural aspect, of the lives of the informant that she was not able to capture. But I hope that this can be clarified. And when we speak about background, what do we exactly talk about? And if you would like to limit it to gender, occupation, age, and field, then there might be a proper rationalization for this. In terms of her analysis, I was kind of like curious if any grouping or cohort were created and treated separately in the analysis. I believe there were some sort of comparisons made. So I was like thinking, were there certain groupings that were actually made out of the like sort of background by looking into the background? So that is probably one clear question that I have to Jasmine. And of course, how she try to reconcile the background and the instrument variables, both for the readiness and the learning effort. And on a more personal note, I'm really curious about Jasmine's motivation for this study, for comparing both. But did she actually get it from actual classroom observations, or does she see any important gap in the literature that she needs to fill? And finally, my last point would be, because I could not, for me, like I see the value of looking into indices and scales, that were made in different contexts. I was like thinking, what if Jasmine's direction in her dissertation will be actually formulating a scale or an index for readiness, and also for learning effort that is actually Philippine appropriate, like considering the background, the dimensions that are familiar, recurrent, in the context of the Philippines and the Filipino experience. So I think those are all the comments that I have for the three presentations. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for very generous and comprehensive comments. So at this moment, we can do about 10-minute open forum. So if possible, speakers and discussants, and then Dr. Hyung-jong Kim, perhaps we can, if your camera works well, you can turn on your camera so we all of you can join the open forum. So in the session one, Dr. Marshall Murillo also shared some comments and then questions. And then just now, Dr. Aldrin Lee shared some comments and questions. And then perhaps we can also have ask Dr. Kim, do you have any particular comments or questions for any speakers?
Right. First of all, I'd like to thank for all the presentation and then the commentator, the professors who give the very valuable presentation and comment as well. So I think I pretty much enjoyed your presentation. All of the presentation has some kind of the great potential for not only for the academic circle, also for the policy implications as well. So when it comes to that, the practice of such good ideas, I think one thing that remind me is that we need to consider that the domestic levels, the conditions, such as when you talk about that the current challenges and even for further cooperation between two countries, even at the regional level, in the name of the regional cooperation or regionalism. So first thing is that the domestic politics. So my question may goes to whoever the interested in these issues. So both countries, the Philippines and Korea, recently have the new governments. So how do you reckon that it's possible implication or the future relations between two countries under the new governments in both countries? So that's my questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. Perhaps before we go back to other speakers, maybe for this question from Dr. Kim, maybe Joshua, would you like to give some words? Is your microphone working, Joshua? Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Yes,
All right,
yes.
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for the very interesting question. For background first, what I admire about the United States foreign policy is that even though the power shifts from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party and vice versa, the foreign policy does not change. I mean, the general contours of the foreign policy does not change. But in the case of the Philippines, especially in the previous administration, with regards to relations with China, I think there had been, some general shifts. But in general, I think the Marcos administration, the new administration, would still pursue a meaningful and strong relations with Japan, as seen in the visit from last week of the President Marcos to the government of to the country of Japan. Because as I have said, the bottom line of the need for the strong relations between the Philippines and Japan is economic reasons. The Philippines is, as they argue in the Philippine House of Representatives and the Senate, is undercapitalized, and we need FDI to come in. And Japan is a very willing partner, a very willing trade partner to provide ODA in various forms, in forms that are easier to attain than in the case of Western aid providers. So I think the short question to the answer is that there'd be no change, no significant change towards in the foreign policy of the Philippines towards Japan in that matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your response, Joshua. So since we had some comments, and then I think the questions were also generated by the discussants, we can just go back to the first speaker. So we have Yerim, Honey, and Fame, and then Sinyu, and then Joshua, and then Jas. Because Hyunji from Yonsei University had some emergency, so she excused to exit a bit earlier. So let us go back to our speakers. So you may respond to comments or questions from your discussants, or you can also just add some more if you haven't fully discussed during your presentation. So can we call Yerim
Here, yes. Thank you, Dr. Marshall Murillo and Dr. Kim, for your comments. For my research, I focused on the power of citizens and started the the research. So please understand that I have not properly investigated the indicators of whether ASEAN or Korea's influence is actually affecting the political situation in Myanmar. And I think to discuss furthermore about the evidence and the changes in Myanmar, I need a further investigation is needed with more broader perspective. And still, I think my research shown that Myanmar citizens gain strength and have the power to unite together because there's a precedent case in South Korea. And about the domestic affairs, I think I have to keep more in touch about the current situation of Myanmar and to have more research about this cases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Yerim. How about Honey and Fame?
Hello, thank you so much for your comments and suggestion regarding our research. I remember the question of Mr. Marshall Murillo, is it a passing trend that the celebrity diplomacy will just it's just phenomenal right now, and in the future it will not be some like the BTS is doing. But for me, I evolve since the structure of the fandom of the celebrities, they already did something in the past, so they are more cooperative with the future as well. And also in the fourth generation of Hallyu, there are also emerging artists that are already cooperating with the United Nations or other organizations such as IESPA. I think they are the second K-pop group host deliver a speech at the United Nations headquarters at New York. And there might be also officially appointed by the South Korean government as their celebrity diplomats, while others are to perform their obligation, like military or otherwise, to their nation. That would be all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's meet Sinyu first.
Okay, thank you for the comments, and I will sincerely think about your comment and add more detail about the Japan research part. And as you say, there are a lot of research about NGOs and whether it is really effective or not. We still should do more work and still should do more research on it. I will think about it, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sinyu. How about Joshua?
So, hi again. Thank you to Dr. Lee for the insightful comments. For the first question, I think what Filipinos call Filipino comfort women are lola. It's quite a neutral term. Lola is Filipino term for grandmother. I think in Korea they also call the comfort women survivors halmyoni, so grandmother as well. I recall in the previous years, Tula ang UP produced a play entitled after the life of a comfort woman survivor, Rosa Henson, and they titled it Lola Rosa. For the methodology, because what I want to do is to explain and understand why the statements of Philippine statesmen were such, I'd use grounded theory because I saw the literature in both the Philippines and Korea, and they all tried to generate a pattern or a conclusion in the examination of qualitative data like newspaper articles, speeches, statements, etc. And the data that I'd use would comprise of the transcripts and statements of the members of the Philippine House of Representatives and the Senate, which is actually the currency in Congress. The currency in Congress is dialogue or discourse. They do not, in the strictest sense, do physical actions. They speak. And incidentally, national interests are formulated by statesmen through discourse and dialogue as well. So it kind of triangulates that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Lastly, Jess.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for the comments. I'll be speaking in a much slower pace during this open forum. Originally, the research was really motivated by me profiling my prospective participants for my dissertation. That was actually the inspiration for this research, but when I was conducting this research, I was also forced to really test several skills to see whether or not, or like to profile my learners, since I would like to look into adult Filipino learners who are learning Korean as a foreign language from the Philippines and how they are using the online environment to learn more about the language and the society of Korea. I really use the online learning scale or online learning readiness scale to find out, like, generally if this profile are ready to learn using online platform. However, we see, I saw one of your comments is this a Philippine appropriate scale, that these two? Based on what I observed, especially the foreign language learning effort, this is something that may have a different connotation among Filipino learners, and I think it's something that can be further developed in our setting. You mentioned about online learning and versus classroom learning based potential. Actually, there is call this an overlap in the study, because online learning readiness scale is looking only on the readiness in terms of learning using the online platforms. It doesn't look into like call this other factors about classroom-based teaching anymore. But my my participants have experienced both, or either online learning or classroom-based learning. So that's something that the scale was not able to measure. So maybe what I can explore later on is on finding out how really these learners study or learn the foreign language. The rationalization, depending on their background, the initial call this cohorts that I investigated a while ago and presented, I used the profiling from previous studies that have already existed, but I see that it is not a very effective way of setting up or like comparing backgrounds, and something that can be improved in the next studies, or in if ever I will do the actual profiling for my dissertation. Was grouping cohorts created and treated separately in the analysis? I tried, but no, because I see that the results are unanimous, so I cannot compare cohorts anymore. Ayun, last, yeah, I think it's already, I covered the rest. I think this is something that I could learn. Thank you for your comments, and these are things that I could use for my dissertation in the future.
Thank you, Just, for additional words. To wrap up, if two discussants, Dr. Marshall or Aldrin, would you like to have any last, not really questions, but if you have comments for other speakers, would you like?
I'll let Marshall go first, maybe.
Not sure if Marshall's camera is working. Maybe Dr. Lee, you can just quickly do it first.
Yeah. Right. I really appreciate the presentations of the first session, although it's really beyond my expertise. With the little background that I have on international relations, international Korean studies, I was like kind of, for example, in the presentation of in terms of the NGOs, and there was a comparative study of Germany and Japan. I was like kind of curious if there's any actually plan to expand this comparative study involving Korea. Most probably something that we could relate to, you know. So I'm really more concerned about the potential of these works to actually be expanded into you know, a larger scale project in the future. And similarly, in the study of for example, in the study of the democracy in Myanmar, the title actually, it's the crisis of democracy in Myanmar. So I was like hoping that the speaker Yerim could actually also look into the actual challenges that could somehow like put value and substance into the word crisis. Like what specific problems are being encountered there right now? Because, you know, as an outsider, even if you are a scholar, if you don't have access to Myanmar, it would be hard to imagine or to actually create a picture of the current situation of democracy in Myanmar. I know that it has been challenged a lot, but up to what extent? I think that's something that probably the readers would be curious about. And similarly, in terms of the study on celebrity diplomacy, I really appreciated the fact that there was like historical sort of portion in the study. So it was like kind of, I mean, I learned in that particular respect, but I'm also looking at the future of celebrity diplomacy and like in terms of the receptance and how much value does the receiving state actually put into it. So I was like thinking maybe BTS, for example, is doing its work as a global ambassador, but like how it's going to be received by different areas of the world could be different. So I was like looking into that particular variable and how like the reception could vary across regions around the world, across cultures as well, and even across languages. So I was like thinking what if the reception would be different if you look at the Hispanic, you know, or the Latin America. So I am also wishing, you know, to read more if this study would be extended further as a larger scale project in the future. So yeah, those are my last words and comments to the first three presenters. Dr. Be.
Okay, thank you. Maybe lastly, Marshall.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, can I be heard?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I think I've already shared my comments on most of the presentation. But yeah, well, most of the topics presented this morning was really out of my research area as well. No, but I'm really curious about really the role of the third sector. The role of NGOs, especially in uh, in achieving carbon neutrality. I mean, most of the time, the discussion is turned, our attention is turned to the government and the private sectors. But here, we were given an opportunity to hear the role of the NGOs. That's why I asked the question, what are the most effective approach for these third sectors to engage government corporations in making a more tangible policy proposals that would really mitigate the impact of the climate change and basically facilitate adaptation to the already inevitable consequences of this phenomenon, and also the importance of them promoting changing behaviors, because there already literature telling us that this is a good approach in in pushing for this for the minimization of the human and environmental impacts of climate change. So, but and I think I don't have any more opportunity. But congratulations to all the researchers and also to UP KRC for this online event.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Kim, any last words for everyone?
For the last comment, I'd like to say thank you for the organizers and all participants, and especially to Dr. Bae. And then I hope to see you again in another event for the next NextGen conference. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Since this workshop is online, we had kind of time restraint, but hopefully, if we can hold it in person this year or next year, we can also invite Korean and Yonsei students to UP, and then hopefully we can also bring Filipino students to Yonsei campus in the future. So this formally concludes our presentation and discussion, and let us give a virtual round of applause to our speakers and discussants as well. So with this, we formally conclude today's program. But before we leave, let us invite our speakers and discussants and Dr. Hyungjong Kim for a photo op. We will take a photo with speakers first, and then with other audience in the second shot.
Okay, so everyone ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay. With everyone, we wish to request all of the attendees to turn on their cameras. Okay. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, everyone.
The workshop is done, and we have posted the evaluation form link where you can fill out to get the certificate. And we sincerely appreciate everyone to have come this morning, and especially Yonsei students and Dr. Kim. We really appreciate your time and your cooperation. And of course, our Filipino presenters, we are really excited to see your dissertation, thesis, and research outcomes. And UP KRC always opens our door to collaborate and to read more research about this topic in the future. So this concludes today's program. So stay safe, everyone, and see you in our next event. 감사합니다. Salamat po.
감사합니다.
Salamat po.
감사합니다. Thank you so much.
네, 안녕히 가세요.
감사합니다.
교수님 감사합니다.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.